Thank you for joining and listening to the Rare Disease Matrix podcast. This is episode 2 entitled Software Terminology 101. I'm your host for this podcast, Jason Colquitt. I'm also CEO and founder of Across Healthcare based outside of Atlanta, Georgia. The Rare Disease Matrix podcast will be released weekly as 10-minute episodes throughout the year. I hope that you will be able to join us throughout 2022 to learn a little bit more about rare disease, what it takes to manage a software business in the rare disease space, and the successes and failures that might ensue. First off, we're halfway through January of 2022. Can anyone believe that? With that in mind, I hope you're all gearing up for Rare Disease Day. We're only 45 days away. I've seen the NIH programs for Rare Disease Day gearing up, as well as many individual groups and companies, as well as individuals that are gearing up for this day. Wherever you are on Monday, February 28th, plan on wearing some stripes and sharing with others about rare disease. If you're not familiar with this day, or this is new to you, and why, Jason, should I be wearing stripes? This is a good day to get educated on all of these things. So I definitely suggest Googling Rare Disease Day 2022. And I know there's lots of links that'll pop up that'll inform you on what does all this mean? Why was this day selected? So maybe at some point we can go back, maybe on Rare Disease Day, the episode we do that week, we can talk about this. So it's really cool why that day was selected and some of the things that go on throughout that day. So stay tuned there. But just to give you a heads up, less than 45 days away. So be getting ready. What is Across Healthcare and Matrix team up to this week? So one of the things, and you might have guessed by the title of this podcast, it's a lot of terminology. I want to make sure that we're grounded, because throughout the podcast we may use terms that may not make sense. So again, I want to ground everybody on what these things are. So first thing I'll talk about is the methodology that we use. We use Across, and this is a fairly adopted methodology, is called Agile. You'll hear that term. We need to use Agile methodologies. So all that really means is, well, there's a lot behind that. there's a lot behind that, more than you probably ever want to know. But we talk about iteratively, as the name implies, it's agile. So you're releasing things iteratively. You're more agile versus a more rigid structure and methodology of how do you release things. So that's kind of the way we look at things and the way we process. In software development, we also work in what's called sprints. So you may hear me refer to, hey, we've got this sprint that we're finishing up. In fact, we have 2 more sprints before we do a big release to our clients. So that's a fairly common term in software development. So that just means how many days. So each company defines what a sprint is. Here at Across, we use 2-week sprints. So that means when I say we got 2 more sprints, that means we have 4 weeks basically. So at the end of each sprint, you need to be ready to release. So these are just increments of time units of time we use. We also use a term called stand-up meetings. So I've actually worked in companies in the past where we literally stood up. Here at Across, we don't necessarily stand up, but everybody that's physically located here in the office in Georgia, we all get around a meeting owl that shows everybody in the room, and then all of the other resources that are working on Matrix around the country get to dial in every morning. We do our stand-up at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So if you call us at that time, that's where we'll be, is talking through all of the status, what's going on, are there any blockers, those type things. So we've talked through quite a bit of terminologies thus far, but I'm sure we'll hit some more as the podcast goes on today. The term, we talked about 2-week sprint before a major release here at Across and with our Matrix platform. We've been working diligently. So what does that mean when we're going to go to a release, or what does it mean even when we finish a sprint? That means all the features and functionality that we want to get into. So if we're adding a new widget or thing that the system's going to do, or we're also we talk about we need to clean up bugs, or fix all the bugs. So that may be a term that doesn't make sense to you. So let me slow down and talk through that one. So that's anything that doesn't work as designed or as specified, can be what's termed as a bug. It just means it's not working. That could be a lot of times. I guess a bug could you would think it's a bad thing, or it may be an error that pops up on your screen. So those are definitely bugs, and we don't want that to happen. But a bug could be that it just isn't doing what it needs to do. So hopefully that makes sense to you. In this release, we're doing a lot of we've been doing a lot of back end capabilities, but also on the front end, I'll talk through a few of those things that we're doing. We've created a lot of logic within our surveys. So one of the things is we can trigger a new survey off a answer to a question in a previous survey. So a user could log in, see two surveys. As they answer questions within those surveys, we can automatically bring forth more surveys for them to fill out. The reason we want to do this is to not overwhelm the users, that you don't want them to log in and see 100 surveys, and they may or may not have to answer those surveys. So we give them a path, as they answer certain things, or say, my child or I have this specific thing in the answer. We can actually trigger a more complex or ask them more details in a new survey. So that gives us kind of a hierarchy of surveys. So that's a pretty cool feature that we're adding this release. Another feature that we're adding is complex informed consent language. So as most of you probably know, we're in a regulated environment when we talk about rare disease, clinical research, gathering data from patients or caregivers. So we have to specifically consent people. There's what's called an institutional review board, or IRB. You'll hear it termed, that oversees a lot of this and making sure that the language that we present to a user logging in is appropriately worded and makes sense, and the like. You'll hear, instead of IRB in other parts of the world, you hear it called an ethics committee. So that's kind of the same thing, but we've really given a lot of complexity of ability to hide different fields on our informed consents or trigger different consents. And you would think this may be simple, but because of the differing state laws around age, like how old are you, and can you consent for yourself, or do you need your parent or guardian to consent? And then if you are unable, what kind of legal guardianship do you have in order? So there's a lot of complexity around presenting informed consents, and we're just adding a lot of complexity capability to the platform. The next thing that we're adding in this release is force. We've had some force workflow, and you'll ask, what does that mean? But we're getting more specific into what we can guide people to. So a lot of our clients, when users log into their system, they want to force them through a specific workflow. So one thing you always want users typically to hit is the informed consent. So we definitely want them to see that first, and they can't do anything until they go through the informed consent. Another thing we might want to force them through is some of our groups say, hey, if you got your genetic test, we want you to upload that into the system. So we can actually, step them through that through a guided, forced workflow of, informed consent, then upload your genetic test if you have them, and then maybe answer this survey before you can get to the other parts of the the functionality of Matrix that we talked about in the first episode. So there's lots of things that you can do within the system, but a lot of times when a user is new to the system, they want to force them through these things to make sure they've completed these tasks before they move forward. So that's a good thing. The other thing that we're always adding to is what we call, it's an industry term called BI, or analytics, or reporting capability. So BI stands for business intelligence, and you'll hear that term as an industry term called BI, but really it just means we're giving reporting and analytical capabilities both to admins of our system to be able to slice and dice that data that we have captured within the platform, but also providing that capability to slice and dice data to patients and caregivers so that they can, see trends, correlate data that they may want to correlate. So I think we talked about in the first episode, a whole part of our platform on the patient side is what we call insights, patient insights, so they can facilitate some of that. But we're constantly adding to that. That's a never ending. As we capture more and different data, we have to update that and give more capability. So, the last thing before we go, another fun conversation that probably deserves its own podcast, but we've been getting into a clash. So I talked about how we're agile and like to release things iteratively. Well, those institutional review board or ethics committees, they really like things to be locked down and nothing changes. So we've gotten into an interesting clash between those two different points of view. From a software standpoint, we're always excited to release something new and get it out to the users. It's new capability, new features. But from a IRB perspective, they're like, hold on, need to get it reviewed. And in a lot of cases, our clients pay money to get that reviewed by their IRB. So we've been interestingly navigating the, hey, Jason, don't make me spend a lot of money because every time you release, I have to spend money to get this reviewed by our IRB. And it's interesting, different views from different IRBs. We work across many IRBs of, hey, the different IRBs, some of them will say, hey, you can make changes here whenever you want, but others don't. They say, nope, yeah, absolutely. So it's different perspectives on the same rules and regulations. So it's kind of interesting to hear that feedback. Just wanted to throw that in there as a last tidbit of things to think about, or things that we have to think about as we release software in this rare disease space. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode, getting a little bit of a terminology 101 from a software. So now you can go off and if you have any software friends, you can talk shop with them. But I hope you have a great week. I appreciate you listening in and looking forward to seeing you again next week on the Rare Disease Matrix podcast.